The room fell silent as Rebecca stared at the pen before her, the impossible challenge looming. 6 months since the hospital fire had taken her hands. 6 months since she'd written her own name. Her prosthetic fingers trembled as they closed around the pen, Robert's creation, built from spare parts in his workshop between maintenance shifts. "I don't know if I can," she whispered, tears threatening. "Trust yourself," Robert said quietly, his hand steady on her shoulder, with painstaking concentration. Rebecca pressed the pen to paper. The first attempt a scrawl, the second a wobbly letter. But on the third try, something miraculous happened. Her hand moved with growing confidence, the letters taking shape. Rebecca Collins. RN. For a moment, no one breathed. Then a single tear splashed onto the signature. "I can write again," she whispered. "I can actually write." What happens when one maintenance man's innovation changes everything? Before we continue this incredible journey, make sure you've hit that like button and subscribe to see more stories that will restore your faith in humanity. Tomorrow's video will reveal the shocking twist that transformed both their lives forever. The ancient coffee maker sputtered to life at 5:45 a.m., its familiar gurgle echoing through Robert Mitchell's modest two-bedroom apartment. His weathered hands methodically packed Olivia's lunch while waiting for the brew. Movements precise despite the early hour. 15 years of single parenthood had honed his morning routine to clockwork efficiency. "Dad, have you seen my calculus textbook?" Olivia's voice carried from down the hall, still thick with sleep. At 15, she was already taller than him, with her mother's dark curls and his determination. "Check under your physics homework," he called back, adding an extra apple to her lunch bag. She'd been staying up later studying, and he worried about her pushing herself too hard. The acceptance letter from MIT's engineering summer program lay unopened on the kitchen counter. A reminder of dreams that felt just out of reach on a maintenance technician's salary. Robert ran his finger over the MIT emblem, remembering how Catherine's eyes had lit up when she'd received her own acceptance letter nearly 30 years ago, before cancer took her, before he became both mother and father to their daughter. The Greenwood Community Center was already bustling when Robert arrived at 7. He loved these early morning hours before the usual chaos of basketball practices and senior yoga classes filled the halls. His tool belt settled familiarly around his waist as he reviewed the day's maintenance requests, stuck window in the computer lab, flickering lights in the east corridor, broken handle on the pool door. It was during these quiet moments that he first noticed her. Rebecca Collins moved through the center like a ghost of her former self, her empty sleeves neatly pinned, her smile never quite reaching her eyes. She volunteered 3 mornings a week, helping with the senior wellness program despite her own challenges. Robert had overheard the other volunteers talking about her story, the hospital fire, the children she'd saved, the price she'd paid for her heroism. Today, she was attempting to help Mrs. Abernathy with her blood pressure reading, awkwardly manipulating the cuff with her forearms. Robert paused in his work on the nearby drinking fountain, watching as she struggled to secure the Velcro strap. Mrs. Abernathy patted Rebecca's arm gently, her weathered face creased with concern. "Let me help you, dear." "I need to figure this out," Rebecca insisted, her voice carrying the same quiet determination Robert recognized in himself. "There has to be a way." The morning progressed with its usual rhythm of repairs and maintenance checks. During his lunch break, Robert retreated to the small workshop he'd set up in an unused storage room, a perk of being the one person who could fix anything in the building. Here, surrounded by spare parts and tools, he'd begun sketching his ideas. The preliminary designs were crude, but each iteration brought him closer to something functional. He thought about Olivia's college fund, about the hours he spent at his second job doing repairs for neighbors, about the MIT summer program that seemed impossibly expensive. But then he looked at his sketches of the prosthetic hands, and something inside him knew this project mattered more than money. The afternoon sun slanted through the high windows as Robert finished installing new hinges on the pool door. Rebecca passed by, heading toward the exit, her purse clutched awkwardly between her arms. She dropped her keys, and before she could maneuver to retrieve them, Robert was there. "Allow me," he said, handing them to her, up close. He could see the faint scars that traced up her forearms, legacy of her desperate rescue attempt. "Thank you," she replied, managing a small smile. "You're always around when things need fixing." "It's my job," Robert said, then added softly, "Some things are harder to fix than others." Something flickered in Rebecca's eyes, recognition, perhaps, or shared understanding, but before either could speak again. His radio crackled with another maintenance request, and the moment passed. That evening, after Olivia had gone to bed, Robert sat in his makeshift workshop, adding detailed notes to his designs. He thought about Rebecca's determined attempts to continue helping others, about Olivia's dreams of engineering school, about his own yearning to create something meaningful. In the quiet of the night, surrounded by tools and possibilities, he made a decision. He would find a way to help, not just for Rebecca, but for himself, for Olivia, for the chance to prove that one person's dedication could make a difference. The pediatric ward had always been Rebecca's favorite place in Westside Hospital. Even now, 6 months after the fire, she could close her eyes and see the cheerful murals of ocean creatures that had lined the walls, hear the soft beeping of monitors mixing with children's laughter. The night everything changed had started like any other. She'd been doing her final rounds, checking on 7-year-old Tommy Rodriguez, who'd been admitted with pneumonia. The boy had finally fallen asleep after a long evening of fever and coughing. The smoke alarm's shriek had torn through the quiet like a knife. Rebecca still remembered every detail with crushing clarity, the acrid smell seeping under the door. The way the handle burned her palm when she first touched it. The fire had started 2 floors below, but it was moving fast. Too fast. The evacuation protocol she'd practiced dozens of times kicked in automatically. "Everyone who can walk, line up at the door," she'd called, her voice steady despite the fear clutching at her chest. "Bigger kids, help the little ones." Tommy was still too weak to walk. Rebecca scooped him up, directing the other children toward the emergency stairwell. As they made their way down, she could hear the fire's hungry roar growing louder. The heat was becoming unbearable. They were almost clear when she heard it, a small voice crying from the floor above. Without hesitation, Rebecca had handed Tommy to Jerry, one of the older patients. "Get them outside," she'd ordered. "I'll be right behind you." The next few minutes existed in her memory like fragments of a nightmare, the scorching heat as she fought her way back up the stairs. 2 4-year-old twins huddled in a supply closet where they'd hidden in fear. The ceiling collapsing behind them as she shepherded them toward safety. The final desperate push through flames that seemed to reach for them with malicious intent. Her hands had protected the children's faces from the worst of the heat, but the price had been steep. By the time emergency responders reached them, the damage was done. 3rd-degree burns, the doctors had said. Multiple surgeries followed. In the end, they couldn't save her hands. The newspaper article about her heroism still hung in the community center's lobby, though Rebecca wished they'd take it down. "Local nurse sacrifices hands to save children." The headline made her sound like some kind of saint when really, she'd just done what anyone would have done. What she couldn't do anymore was what mattered: start of ease, change bandages, hold a frightened child's hand during a blood draw. These thoughts circled through Rebecca's mind as she sat in her small apartment, watching the sunset paint the walls orange. Too much like flames. The twins' parents had visited her in the hospital, crying, grateful. They'd started a GoFundMe for her medical expenses, but no amount of money could restore what she'd lost. The hospital had offered her an administrative position, but the thought of sitting at a desk, away from patient care, made her chest tight with grief. The community center volunteering had been her therapist's suggestion. "Start small," Dr. Patterson had said. "Find ways to still help people." So Rebecca did, though each day felt like learning to walk again. Simple tasks: taking blood pressure readings, helping with exercise classes, filing paperwork became mountains to climb. She'd noticed Robert Mitchell watching her sometimes when he thought she wasn't looking. There was no pity in his gaze. Unlike so many others, just quiet observation and something else she couldn't quite name. Understanding. Perhaps. She'd seen him working late in that small workshop of his, caught glimpses of technical drawings and mechanical parts through the door. Today, when he'd helped her with her keys, She'd felt a spark of something she thought she'd lost. Hope, maybe, or possibility. His words about fixing things had stayed with her, echoing in her mind as she went through her evening routine. Awkwardly preparing a microwave dinner, struggling with buttons and zippers, in her dreams that night. Rebecca's hands were whole again. She was back in the pediatric ward, checking vitals, smoothing fevered brows, writing in charts. But when she looked down at her restored hands, they weren't made of flesh and bone, but something else entirely, something stronger, something that couldn't burn. The clock on Robert's workshop wall showed 11:42 p.m., but he barely noticed. His world had narrowed to the components spread across his workbench. Servo motors salvaged from old printers. Microcontrollers bought secondhand. Finger joints he'd designed and 3D printed at the local library. A half-empty cup of coffee had gone cold beside his notebook, its pages dense with calculations and sketches. He flexed the prototype finger joint, watching the smooth articulation with critical eyes. This was his third iteration, each version getting closer to what he envisioned. The first had been too rigid, the second too fragile. But this one had promise. "Dad," Robert started, nearly dropping the delicate mechanism. Olivia stood in the doorway, wearing her mother's old MIT sweatshirt as pajamas, her hair mussed from sleep, her expression caught between concern and curiosity. "Sweetheart, what are you doing up? It's almost midnight. I could ask you the same thing." She crossed the room, peering at his work. Her eyes widened as she took in the scattered components, the detailed technical drawings, the half-assembled prosthetic finger. Are you building a hand?" Robert set down his tools, suddenly aware of how this might look, a maintenance man trying to play biomedical engineer in his spare time. "It's probably crazy," he admitted, "but you've seen Rebecca at the center, how she struggles with the simplest tasks. I keep thinking, with the right design." Olivia picked up one of his sketches, studying it with the same intensity she brought to her advanced placement physics homework. "These servo calculations, you're trying to replicate natural finger movement? That's the idea. Each finger needs 3 degrees of freedom, like a real hand. The challenge is making it responsive enough to handle delicate tasks while keeping it strong enough for daily use." He smiled slightly. "I've been watching YouTube videos on biomechanics between repair jobs." Instead of the skepticism he'd feared, Olivia's face lit up with excitement. "Dad, this is incredible. Have you considered using magnetic sensors for the control interface? We just studied Hall effect sensors in physics class. They could provide more precise movement detection." For the next hour, father and daughter hunched over the workbench together, bouncing ideas back and forth. Olivia's fresh perspective helped him see new possibilities in the design. Her suggestion about the sensor placement could solve the responsiveness issues he'd been struggling with for weeks. "You know," Olivia said, sketching a quick diagram, "if we position the battery pack here instead of here, it would better balance the weight distribution." She paused, looking up at him. "Why didn't you tell me about this before?" Robert ran a hand through his graying hair. "I guess I wasn't sure I could actually do it. I'm not a real engineer. Olivia, I fix broken pipes and air conditioners. This is way beyond my usual scope." "That's exactly why you can do it," Olivia insisted. "You understand how things work, how to fix them when they break. Plus," she added with a grin, "you've got a future MIT engineering student to help you now." Robert's heart squeezed. "About that, sweetie, the summer program. I've been looking at our finances and Dad, stop!" Olivia's voice was firm. "We'll figure it out. Maybe I can get a scholarship or do some tutoring for extra money. This," she gestured at the prosthetic components, "this is more important right now. Nothing's more important than your future." "Maybe they're connected." Olivia picked up the prototype finger, turning it thoughtfully in her hands. "You always tell me that engineering is about solving problems to help people. Isn't that exactly what you're doing here?" Robert looked at his daughter, really looked at her, and saw not just his little girl, but a young woman with her mother's compassion and her own brilliant mind. When had that happened? They worked for another hour, refining the design, making lists of needed components. Olivia's enthusiasm was contagious, her quick mind catching details he'd missed. By the time she finally headed back to bed, yawning but excited, the project felt less like an impossible dream and more like a real possibility. Alone again in his workshop, Robert added Olivia's suggestions to his notebooks. The Hall effect sensors would need to be specially ordered, but he could get started on modifying the finger joint design tomorrow. His gaze fell on the framed photo on his workbench. His late wife, Catherine, in her graduation gown, proudly holding up her engineering degree. She would have loved seeing Olivia like this, he thought, would have been right there with them, adding her own brilliant ideas to the mix. I wish you could see her. Katie, he whispered to the photo. She's so much like you. Outside, Stonehaven had grown quiet, but in Robert's workshop, possibilities continued to unfold, one careful calculation at a time. Rebecca stared at the coffee cup sitting on the community center's break room counter, mentally rehearsing the sequence of movements she'd need to manage it. She'd modified this particular cup herself, adding textured grip tape around the middle where she could clasp it between her forearms. Still, hot liquids remained a daily challenge. Let me help you with that, offered Linda from reception, already reaching for the cup. I've got it, Rebecca said, perhaps too sharply. She softened her tone. But thank you. I need to practice. Linda withdrew, concern etched on her face. Rebecca had memorized that expression over the past 6 months, the subtle mixture of pity and discomfort that seemed to follow her everywhere. She focused on the cup instead, carefully maneuvering it between her arms. Small victories. Her therapist called these moments today. The coffee made it to her lips without spilling. The morning senior wellness check-ins were getting easier. At least, she'd developed a system for the blood pressure cuff, using her teeth to hold one end while positioning it with her arms. Not exactly conventional nursing technique, but it worked. Usually, your pressure's looking much better, Mr. Rodriguez, she told the elderly man seated before her. He was Tommy's grandfather, the boy she'd carried from the fire. The family had practically adopted her since then, though their kindness sometimes felt like another weight to carry. Thanks to you, Majida, he replied, patting her arm. My daughter wanted me to invite you to Tommy's birthday party next month. He asks about you. All the time. Rebecca managed to smile even as her chest tightened. Tell him I said hello. She was gathering her supplies when she heard the familiar sound of Robert Mitchell's tools in the hallway. He was replacing a light fixture, his movements precise and practiced. Their eyes met briefly as she passed, and she noticed again how he looked at her not with pity, but with something like professional assessment. The moment was interrupted by a crash from the exercise room. Rebecca hurried in to find Mrs. Abernathy on the floor beside an overturned chair, clutching her ankle. I lost my balance, the older woman explained, trying to wave off concern. Just give me a minute. Rebecca's nursing instincts kicked in immediately, but frustration followed just as quickly. She couldn't help Mrs. Abernathy up, couldn't check her ankle for swelling or injury, couldn't even offer a steadying hand. I'll get help, she said, turning toward the door, only to find Robert already there, tool belt still around his waist. Allow me, he said quietly, moving past her to assist Mrs. Abernathy. His hands were gentle as he helped her to a seated position, competent as he examined her ankle. Nothing seems broken, but you'll want to ice this. Rebecca watched him work, recognizing the careful efficiency in his movements. He handled the situation exactly as she would have, if she still could. The first aid kit's in the supply closet, she said, needing to contribute something. Left shelf, eye level. Robert nodded, retrieving it without comment. Together they got Mrs. Abernathy settled with an ice pack and called her daughter for a ride home. Throughout the process, Robert seamlessly followed Rebecca's medical guidance while compensating for her physical limitations. There was no awkwardness, no hesitation, just quiet cooperation. You've done this before, Rebecca observed after Mrs. Abernathy had been safely collected by her family. Basic first aid was part of my military training, he replied, cleaning up the supplies. Though nothing like your nursing experience. Former nursing experience, she corrected, the words bitter on her tongue. Robert paused in his work, turning to face her fully. "You're still a nurse," he said firmly. "The knowledge, the instincts that's not in your hands, it's in here." He tapped his temple. And here, his hand moved to his heart. The simple truth of his words caught her off guard. For the first time in months, someone was seeing past what she'd lost to what remained. The realization brought unexpected tears to her eyes. "I should get back to my rounds," she said quickly, needing space to process this new perspective. "Rebecca," Robert called as she reached the door. "You forgot your coffee cup." He held it out, waiting patiently as she maneuvered it between her arms, no offering to help, no rushing to prevent a potential spill. Just quiet respect for her independence. "Thank you," she said softly, meaning far more than the cup. Robert stood in his workshop doorway, watching Rebecca help with the senior morning check-ins. His prototype sat heavy in his drawer, wrapped in a clean shop towel. Olivia's voice echoed in his mind. "Dad, you have to show her. The worst she can say is no." He'd been rehearsing this moment for weeks, but now that it had arrived, his carefully prepared speech felt inadequate. How do you tell someone you've been secretly building them prosthetic hands? The last senior citizen wandered off, leaving Rebecca alone with her paperwork. She had developed an impressive system for managing forms, using her forearms to hold things in place while writing with a pen grip between her teeth. Robert watched her determination with a familiar ache in his chest. "Rebecca," his voice came out rougher than intended. She looked up, surprised by his formal tone. "Of course. Not here," he said quickly. "In my workshop, if that's okay." Something flickered across her face, curiosity mixed with caution. After a moment's hesitation, she nodded. Robert's workshop was unusually tidy today, thanks to Olivia's insistence on making it presentable. His technical drawings were carefully organized, his tools arranged with precision. The prototype waited in its drawer like a secret about to be revealed. "I've been working on something," he began, then stopped. Started again. "First, I want you to know that if this isn't something you're interested in, I completely understand. There's no pressure, no obligation." Rebecca's expression shifted from confusion to concern. "Robert, what's going on?" Instead of answering immediately. He opened the drawer and removed the wrapped prototype. His hands were steady as he set it on the workbench, but his heart hammered against his ribs. "For the past few months, I've been—" He unwrapped the towel, revealing the carefully crafted prosthetic hand. "I've been working on this." Rebecca's sharp intake of breath filled the small room. She stared at the device, its metallic fingers gleaming under the workshop lights, its joints articulated with precise care. "It's not finished," Robert continued quickly, fighting the urge to cover it back up. "The response time needs work, and the grip strength isn't quite where I want it, but the basic mechanics are sound. Olivia, my daughter, she helped with some of the sensor calculations." "You built this for me?" Rebecca's voice was barely a whisper. "I know it's presumptuous. I should have asked first. But I wanted to make sure it was viable before getting your hopes up. It's designed to be controlled by muscle movements in your forearm. Using magnetic sensors, the fingers can be calibrated for different grip strengths, so you could handle everything from a coffee cup to a blood pressure cuff." Rebecca moved closer to the workbench, her eyes fixed on the prototype. "How did you learn to do this?" "YouTube, initially," he admitted with a self-deprecating smile. "Then engineering textbooks from the library. Olivia's been teaching me what she learns in her advanced physics class. It's been educational." "Why?" The question was soft but intense. Robert met her gaze steadily. "Because every time I see you help someone despite your limitations, it reminds me that some people don't just accept the hand they're dealt, they find a way to reshuffle the deck." Tears welled in Rebecca's eyes, but she blinked them back. "I can't afford something like this. The insurance company barely covered my basic medical bills." "I'm not selling it," Robert said firmly. "I'm offering to help to try. At least, if you're willing to be patient with the learning curve. I'm willing to keep refining the design until it works for you." Rebecca looked from the prototype to Robert and back again. Can I? She gestured toward the prosthetic with her forearm. Of course. Robert carefully lifted the device, explaining its features as Rebecca examined it. The control interface would attach here, reading the electrical signals from your muscle movements. Each finger can be individually articulated, and there's a thumb opposition mechanism that allows for different grip patterns. Like for holding a pen. The hope in her voice made his chest tight. Or a stethoscope. He nodded. Whatever you need. Rebecca was quiet for a long moment, processing. When she finally spoke, her voice was thick with emotion. I need to think about this. It's a lot to take in. Take all the time you need, Robert assured her. The offer stands. She turned to leave, then paused at the door. Robert, thank you. Not just for this, but for seeing me as someone worth investing in. After she left, Robert sat at his workbench, looking at the prototype that represented countless hours of work and hope. It wasn't perfect yet, but then again, neither was life. Sometimes the most important step was simply beginning. The first fitting session took place on a Sunday morning when the community center was closed except for Robert's maintenance duties. Olivia had insisted on being there, her notebook ready to record every observation. Rebecca sat nervously at the workbench while Robert made final adjustments to the sensor placement. The electrodes need good contact with your skin, he explained, carefully positioning the sensors along Rebecca's forearm. These will read the electrical signals from your muscle movements. It might take some practice to get the control patterns right. Rebecca nodded, trying to hide her trembling. She'd spent the past week alternating between hope and terror, between dreams of holding a stethoscope again and nightmares of failure. What should I expect? Start with something simple, Olivia suggested, her enthusiasm infectious. Maybe just trying to move one finger. Robert powered up the system, watching the diagnostic lights blink to life. Focus on your index finger first. Try to think about moving it just like you would your natural hand. Rebecca closed her eyes, concentrating for a moment. Nothing happened. Then, with a whir so soft it was barely audible, the prosthetic's index finger twitched. Oh! Rebecca's eyes flew open, tears immediately welling up. I felt that, I didn't feel it, but I made it move. Robert and Olivia exchanged excited glances. Try again, Robert encouraged. This time, keep your eyes open. Watch the movement. The second attempt was less successful. The finger jerked erratically, then locked up. Rebecca's face fell, but Robert was already reaching for his tools. That's normal, he assured her. The calibration needs fine-tuning. Olivia, can you note down the sensor readings? They worked through the morning, adjusting sensitivity levels, repositioning sensors, testing different muscle groups. Each small success was celebrated, each failure analyzed and documented. By noon, Rebecca could reliably move 3 fingers, though coordinating them remained a challenge. It's like learning to walk again, she said during a break, watching Robert make modifications to the thumb joint. Neural pathways, Olivia chimed in, looking up from her notes. We studied this in biology. Your brain needs to create new connections for controlling the prosthetic. It's like learning to play an instrument. Speaking of instruments, Robert said, finishing his adjustment. Try this. He placed a plastic cup on the table. Let's see if we can work on a grasping motion. Rebecca positioned herself, focusing intently on the cup. The prosthetic hand moved slowly, fingers extending toward the target. The first attempt knocked the cup over. The second barely brushed it. But on the third try, her fingers closed around it, not gracefully, but definitively. I'm holding it, she whispered, then louder. I'm holding it. The cup slipped a moment later, but it didn't matter. The possibility had become real. They continued testing throughout the afternoon, each attempt teaching them something new. The thumb needed more rotational freedom. The wrist joint was too stiff. The sensor placement had to be precisely mapped to prevent signal interference. Dad, Olivia said quietly during another adjustment, what about the MIT program? The deadline's tomorrow. Robert glanced at Rebecca, who was practicing finger movements with fierce concentration. We'll figure something out, he murmured back. But Rebecca had heard. MIT program. Olivia explained about the engineering summer program, her acceptance, and the looming deadline. How much is the tuition? Rebecca asked. It's not important right now, Robert insisted, but Olivia answered anyway. $5,000. Rebecca looked at the prosthetic hand, then at her own scarred forearms. That's a lot of money to spend on someone else's hands instead of your daughter's future. It's not instead of, Robert said firmly. This project is teaching both of us more than any summer program could. Right. Olivia nodded enthusiastically. The practical applications of electromagnetic sensors alone are fascinating. Plus, I'm learning about neuromuscular interfaces, mechanical engineering, even basic programming. Still, Rebecca interrupted, it's not right. Try the cup again, Robert said, effectively ending the discussion. I've adjusted the grip sensitivity. This time, when Rebecca grasped the cup, she managed to lift it an inch off the table before it slipped progress, measured in inches and ounces. But progress nonetheless, as they packed up for the day. Rebecca caught Robert's hand. Thank you, she said softly. Not just for this, but for treating it like a project we're all working on together. Not something you're doing for me? Robert squeezed her shoulder gently. That's exactly what it is, a journey we're all taking. One step at a time. Walking home that evening, Olivia linked her arm through her father's. You know what? Dad, I think we're building something even bigger than hands here. Looking at his daughter's knowing smile, Robert couldn't help but agree. Robert sat at his kitchen table late that night, surrounded by bills and bank statements. The numbers refused to add up differently no matter how many times he rearranged them. The MIT program's deadline glared at him from Olivia's acceptance letter, while receipts for prosthetic components scattered across the table told their own story of mounting expenses. His cell phone buzzed another text from the evening maintenance job he'd had to cancel to work on Rebecca's prototype. That was $300 he couldn't afford to lose. But the calibration sessions couldn't wait. The servo motors alone had cost nearly 2 weeks' worth of overtime pay. Dad. Olivia stood in the doorway, holding 2 mugs of tea. She'd started doing this lately, bringing him tea when she found him up late working on bills. Too much like her mother. Knowing too much, too young. You should be in bed, sweetheart. So should you. She set a mug in front of him and peered at the papers. Is it about MIT? Before he could answer. An envelope slid from the stack, the latest statement from his second mortgage. Taken out for Olivia's college prep courses. The interest rate was crushing, but it had seemed worth it when she got the highest SAT scores in her school's history. I'm not going to MIT, Olivia said quietly. I already decided. Robert's head snapped up. What do you mean you're not going? I can do the regular summer session at the community college instead. Mrs. Peterson says they might even have a teaching assistant position available in the physics lab. That would look good on my college applications too. Olivia, no, we're not giving up on MIT. I'll figure something out. Dad, her voice was gentle but firm. I've seen the component receipts. I know how much you're spending on Rebecca's hands, and it matters more. Nothing matters more than your future. This is my future. Olivia sat down, pushing aside some bills to spread out her notebook. Look at these designs, the sensor array we developed. It's completely original. The grip strength calibration system, that's innovation. Dad, real-world engineering that's actually helping someone. Before Robert could respond, his phone buzzed again. This time it was a text from Rebecca. Insurance denied the appeal again, still claiming experimental technology isn't covered. I'm so sorry. Olivia read the message over his shoulder and squeezed his arm. See, we can't stop now. She needs this. Across town. Rebecca sat in her own apartment, staring at the insurance company's final denial letter. Her savings account was almost depleted from the previous surgeries and rehabilitation. The small disability payment barely covered her rent, and her parents had already remortgaged their house to help with her medical bills. She flexed her forearms, feeling the phantom sensation of fingers that weren't there. The memory of holding that plastic cup, even for a few seconds, haunted her for the first time in months. She'd felt like a nurse again, not just a former nurse. Her gaze fell on the newspaper clipping framed on her wall, the story about the hospital fire. The article mentioned that the twins she'd saved had made full recoveries. Their parents had offered to help with her expenses, but she'd refused. They had their own children to take care of. A notification popped up on her laptop, another rejection from a grant application for medical assistance technology. She'd applied to every foundation she could find, but they all said the same thing: individual cases weren't eligible for funding. Back in Robert's kitchen, father and daughter were still discussing options. "What if we started a GoFundMe?" Olivia suggested. "People love inspiring stories." Robert shook his head. Rebecca would never agree. She already feels guilty about the MIT situation. "Then we don't tell her. We focus on the bigger picture, developing affordable prosthetics for everyone." "That would take more resources than we have." Robert sighed. "The prototype alone is already working better than the $45,000 model the insurance company denied her." Olivia's eyes lit up with that familiar problem-solving gleam. "Dad, what if that's the real opportunity here? Not just helping Rebecca, but finding a way to make this technology accessible to everyone who needs it." Robert looked at his daughter, seeing again that mixture of her mother's compassion and her own brilliant mind. Then he looked at the bills scattered across the table, each one a reminder of the gap between dreams and reality. His phone buzzed one more time, a text from the community center director. "Budget cuts coming. All non-essential staff hours being reduced. Need to discuss your schedule tomorrow." Robert closed his eyes, feeling the weight of all these intersecting pressures. When he opened them, Olivia was still watching him, waiting for his response, believing in him with that absolute faith that both inspired and terrified him. "One step at a time," he said finally. "First, we get the prototype working perfectly. Then we'll see what other possibilities open up." The workshop hummed with nervous energy early Saturday morning. Olivia had spent the entire week refining the sensor algorithms. Working through lunch periods and staying up late into the night, Robert had rebuilt the thumb mechanism 3 times, each version more responsive than the last. Today would be their first attempt at fine motor control. "Ready?" Robert asked, making the final connections to the control interface. Rebecca nodded, trying to keep her breathing steady. The previous sessions had shown promising progress with gross motor movements, but today was different. Today they would attempt something she hadn't done in 6 months: write her name. "Remember," Olivia said, adjusting her laptop where she was monitoring the sensor feeds. "Just like we practiced, visualize each movement before you make it." Robert placed a pen and paper on the workbench. The pen looked impossibly small, impossibly precise in its requirements. Rebecca stared at it, remembering thousands of patient charts, prescriptions, care notes. Her name, written countless times throughout her nursing career, now seemed like an insurmountable challenge. "I don't know if I can," she whispered. "You can," Olivia said firmly. "The calibration is perfect. The grip sensitivity is exactly where it needs to be. Trust the science. Trust yourself," Robert added quietly. Rebecca closed her eyes, focusing on the muscle patterns they'd been practicing. The prosthetic hand moved smoothly, fingers extending toward the pen. The first attempt to grasp it failed: too much pressure, the pen skittering across the workbench. "That's okay," Robert encouraged, retrieving it. "The sensors are reading clearly. Try again, just a little lighter touch." The second attempt was better. The fingers closed around the pen with surprising delicacy. Rebecca held her breath, carefully lifting it off the surface. The pen stayed firmly in her grasp. "Perfect," Olivia breathed, watching the sensor readings. "Now for the hard part." Rebecca positioned the pen over the paper, her arm trembling slightly. The first mark was messy, more scrawl than script. The second try produced a wobbly R. "Wait," Robert said suddenly. He moved behind her, placing his hands gently on her shoulders. "You're too tense. Remember, the prosthetic responds to muscle signals. The more stressed you are, the more noise in the system." Rebecca took a deep breath, feeling some of the tension ease under his steady touch. She thought about all the times she'd signed her name without thinking: patient admissions, medication orders, birthday cards to her colleagues. The muscle memory was still there, buried beneath months of loss and adaptation. The third attempt flowed more naturally. Her hand moved across the paper with growing confidence, the letters taking shape. Rebecca Collins, RN. For a moment, no one spoke. They all stared at the signature, not perfect, but unmistakably hers. "You did it," Olivia whispered, breaking the silence. "Dad, look at the sensor readings. They're exactly what we predicted." But Robert wasn't looking at the readings. He was watching Rebecca, who hadn't taken her eyes off her signature. A tear splashed onto the paper, smudging the ink slightly. "I can write again," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "I can actually write." Encouraged by this success, they spent the next hour testing different tasks. Rebecca managed to pick up paper clips, turn pages in a book, even type a few words on Olivia's laptop. Each achievement was meticulously documented, each failure analyzed for future improvement. "The thumb opposition still needs work," Robert noted, making adjustments after Rebecca struggled with a twisting motion. "But the basic functionality is solid." "Olivia, your sensor modifications made all the difference. The real breakthrough was your new grip mechanism." "Dad," Olivia replied, still monitoring the data streams, "the response curve is incredible." Their technical discussion was interrupted by a small sound from Rebecca. They turned to find her holding something new, a stethoscope she'd brought with her, hope warring with fear on her face. "Do you think—" She couldn't finish the question. Robert nodded encouragingly. "Try it," with painstaking care. Rebecca positioned the stethoscope in her prosthetic hand. The earpieces took several attempts to place correctly. But then, "I can hear," she breathed, joy and tears mingling in her voice. "For the first time since the fire, I can actually use a stethoscope." Olivia was rapidly typing notes, but her own eyes were suspiciously bright. Robert stood quietly, watching Rebecca listen to her own heart, seeing in her face the same joy he felt in his chest. A knock at the workshop door startled them all. The community center director stood there, eyebrows raised at the scene before her. "I came to discuss the budget cuts," she said slowly, her eyes fixed on Rebecca's prosthetic hand still holding the stethoscope. "But it seems I'm interrupting something far more interesting." Rebecca quickly moved to remove the stethoscope, but the director held up her hand. "No, don't stop. In fact," she pulled out her phone, "I think it's time we showed the board exactly what kind of innovation is happening in our maintenance department." The video of Rebecca using her prosthetic hand had gone quietly viral within the medical community, 3 days after the director's impromptu filming session. Rebecca sat in Robert's workshop, scrolling through emails on her tablet. "Another inquiry from a prosthetics company," she said, looking up. "They want to know if we're interested in selling the patent rights." Robert barely glanced up from the calibration he was performing. "That's the third one this week, right?" "Fourth." Rebecca set down the tablet. "Robert, we need to talk about this. Really talk about it." He finally looked up, recognizing the tone in her voice. Olivia, who had been updating their documentation, closed her laptop. "I've been doing research," Rebecca continued. "Did you know the average cost of a medical-grade prosthetic hand is between $40,000 and $50,000, and that's not including fitting and training?" "Most insurance won't cover experimental designs," Robert added, thinking of Rebecca's denied claims. "Exactly. But what we've created here—" She flexed her prosthetic fingers, the movement now nearly as natural as breathing. "We did it for less than $5,000 in parts. Even with labor costs and overhead, we could produce these at a fraction of the market price." Olivia leaned forward. "Are you suggesting what I think you're suggesting?" Rebecca pulled a folder from her bag, actual paper, because she'd wanted them to see how easily she could now handle documents. "I've drawn up a preliminary business plan. My savings aren't much, but they're enough to lease a small workshop space. With my medical background and your engineering expertise—" "Rebecca," Robert interrupted gently, "I'm a maintenance technician. I'm not qualified to—" "To what?" to innovate, to solve problems no one else has solved. She gestured at her working hand. You've already done that, and Olivia's sensor modifications are literally years ahead of what's currently on the market. Olivia picked up the business plan, her eyes widening as she read. You want to hire Dad full-time as head of engineering. At first, it would just be the three of us. We'd focus on custom prosthetics, working directly with patients to create affordable solutions. No corporate overhead, no massive markup, just helping people who need it. Robert ran a hand through his hair, a gesture both women now recognized as his processing mode. The liability issues alone are addressed in Section 3, Rebecca said, reaching for the folder and flipping it open with her prosthetic hand, a deliberate demonstration. I've already spoken with a medical device lawyer. We'd start with a pilot program, working through existing physical therapy centers, build our reputation gradually. The community center could be our first partnership, Olivia added excitedly. Think about it. Dad, all those people you help every day with building maintenance, you could be helping them rebuild their lives instead. Robert stood up, pacing the small workshop. His tools lined the walls familiar, comfortable, safe but lately. They'd felt less like his life's work and more like a limitation he'd placed on himself. The timing, he said finally. With MIT coming up. About that, Rebecca smiled. Page 7. I've structured the initial investment to include an educational development fund. Any employee pursuing relevant education gets tuition assistance, including summer programs? Olivia gasped. You do that? It's not charity, Rebecca said firmly. It's investment in our future expertise. Besides, she added softly, I wouldn't have these hands if it weren't for both of you. Helping with your education is the least I can do. Robert picked up one of his technical drawings, studying the careful measurements and annotations. He paused, struggling to articulate the dream he'd never dared to have. I always just fix things. Other people's innovations, other people's designs. And now you can create them, Rebecca said. Help people like me rebuild what they've lost, but at a price they can actually afford. We'd need a name, Olivia mused, already catching her father's shift toward possibility. Rebecca smiled. I was thinking Second Chance Prosthetics. Too obvious, Olivia declared. What about Mitchell Collins Innovations? How about just Helping Hands, Robert suggested quietly. Rebecca tested the name silently, watching her prosthetic fingers move. Simple, honest, just like how this all started. Speaking of starts, Olivia said, pulling up a spreadsheet on her laptop. We should run some initial cost projections. If we factor in bulk purchasing of components. Robert watched his daughter dive into the calculations, saw the light in Rebecca's eyes as she leaned in to discuss material sourcing. The fear was still there of failure, of inadequacy, of the unknown, but something else was growing stronger, the possibility that maybe fixing things had just been practice for building something entirely new. All right, he said, pulling up a chair. Show me those numbers. The small industrial space didn't look like much, just another unit in a row of identical workshops on the outskirts of Stonehaven. But to Robert, standing there with the keys in his hand, it represented everything he'd never let himself imagine. Lease is for 2 years, Rebecca said, watching him take it all in. With option to expand into the unit next door if we need it. Robert walked the perimeter slowly, his maintenance technician's eye cataloging every detail. Good bones. Decent electrical. Ventilation would need work. The previous tenant had been a custom furniture maker, leaving behind sturdy workbenches that could easily be adapted for their needs. Dad, look, Olivia called from a small office area in the corner. Perfect space for the design station. We can set up the 3D printer here. Keep the assembly area separate from the consultation room. Her voice trailed off as she noticed her father's expression. What's wrong? Robert pulled out his resignation letter from the community center, still unopened. After 15 years, he'd written it in careful, measured words explaining nothing about prosthetics or new ventures, just a simple thank you in 2 weeks' notice. You don't have to do this, Rebecca said softly. Reading his hesitation, We could start smaller. Keep it as a side project while you maintain your regular job. No, Robert's voice was firm. If we're doing this, we're doing it right. These people we want to help, they deserve our full commitment. Olivia took the letter from his hands and tucked it into her bag. I'll drop it off on my way to school. Consider it done. They spent the rest of the morning moving in their essential equipment, Robert's tools. Carefully accumulated over decades of maintenance work, the 3D printer Olivia had won in a science competition, Rebecca's medical reference materials and testing equipment, each item found its place, transforming the empty space into something purposeful. First client consultation is scheduled for Thursday, Rebecca announced, using her prosthetic hand to pin up a calendar. The movement was so natural now that Robert had to remind himself how impossible it had seemed just months ago. Remember that email from the Veterans Hospital? They have a patient they'd like us to meet with. Already, Robert's stomach tightened. Shouldn't we take some time to set up properly, run more tests? We've been testing for months, Olivia reminded him, unpacking her laptop and development tools. The prototype works. Rebecca's hands work. We have all the documentation and certifications from the Medical Device Review Board. But this would be someone new, different circumstances, different needs, different opportunities to help, Rebecca finished. She flexed her prosthetic fingers, a gesture that had become her way of making a point. Robert, do you know what I did this morning? I made coffee, drove my car, and typed 3 emails. 6 months ago, I couldn't do any of those things. Now I'm about to become a business owner because you decided to help one person? A knock at the door interrupted them. The community center director stood there, holding a small package. I hoped I'd catch you here, she said, stepping inside. The board meeting just finished. I thought you should know we've approved a partnership proposal, if you're interested. We'd like to establish a referral program for community members needing prosthetic services. Robert blinked. But my resignation is exactly why we want to partner with you. She handed him the package. You've been fixing our building for 15 years. Now you can help fix our people. The contract details are inside, along with a letter of recommendation for any other community centers you approach. After she left, they stood in stunned silence, looking at the package. Well, Olivia said finally, I guess we should add partnership agreements to our setup checklist. Rebecca was already making notes on her tablet, her prosthetic fingers tapping efficiently on the screen. We'll need to draft formal assessment protocols, establish pricing tiers for different income levels. One step at a time, Robert said, echoing his old refrain. But this time, it didn't feel like caution, it felt like progress. They worked through the afternoon setting up workstations, organizing inventory, creating client intake forms. Olivia configured their design software, while Robert installed additional lighting and power outlets. Rebecca arranged the consultation area to feel welcoming, but professional. As evening approached, they stood together in the center of their workshop, no longer just a dream, but a reality taking shape around them. We should have a proper nameplate, Olivia suggested. Something official. Robert looked at Rebecca, who nodded encouragingly. Walking to the front window, he carefully applied the vinyl lettering they'd had made. Helping Hands Prosthetics. Innovation through understanding. Too late to turn back now, he said, half joking. Rebecca stood beside him, her prosthetic hand finding his real one. No, she said softly. It's exactly the right time to move forward. Their first client was a 24-year-old veteran named Marcus Reynolds, who'd lost his right hand in Afghanistan. He sat stiffly in their consultation room, his empty sleeve pinned up, skepticism evident in every line of his body. I've been through this before, he said flatly. 3 different prosthetics. None of them worked well enough to justify the cost. My insurance is maxed out, and I can't afford. Let's not talk about cost yet. Rebecca interrupted gently. She held up her prosthetic hand, moving the fingers with fluid precision. Let's talk about what you need your hand to do. Marcus's eyes widened as he watched her movements. You're a nurse, or I was, before I lost both hands in a fire. Now I'm part of developing what you see here. She gestured around the workshop, No corporate markup, no unnecessary bells and whistles, just functional, affordable solutions, Robert observed from his workbench. Letting Rebecca handle the initial consultation, she had a way of connecting with clients that he couldn't match the shared understanding of loss, the practical knowledge of rehabilitation. But when Marcus began describing the specific tasks he wanted to perform, Robert's mind was already sketching modifications. The grip strength is crucial, Marcus explained. My last prosthetic couldn't handle basic tools. I used to work construction. But now, Dad, Olivia whispered from her computer station, I think the modified thumb joint from Rebecca's latest upgrade would work perfectly for this. They were interrupted by a call from their parts supplier. The specialized servo motors they needed were on back order. 6 weeks minimum. We can't wait that long, Robert muttered after hanging up. We promised Marcus a prototype fitting next month. What about those salvage printer motors? Olivia suggested. The ones you used in my science fair project? Too imprecise. We need medical-grade components. Not necessarily, Rebecca chimed in, having finished with Marcus. The medical-grade servos are over-engineered for most tasks. If we could modify the printer motors, Robert was already shaking his head. The liability issues are covered under our testing protocols, Olivia finished. We just need to document the modifications and run extra durability tests. They worked late into the night, Olivia writing new calibration software, while Robert disassembled and modified motors. Rebecca handled the growing stack of paperwork, insurance forms, liability waivers, partnership agreements with physical therapy centers. The Veterans Hospital called again, she mentioned during a coffee break. They have 3 more potential clients. Robert looked up from his workbench, worry creasing his forehead. We can barely handle Marcus's project with our current setup. We need to scale up, Olivia said, not looking away from her screen. The demand is there. We just need to figure out production efficiency. A crash from the storage area made them all jump. A box of components had fallen, scattering expensive parts across the floor. Robert stared at the mess, calculating the cost of each rolled-away sensor. We can't afford mistakes like that, he said quietly. Our margins are too thin. Then we learn from them. Rebecca began picking up parts with her prosthetic hand, a task that would have been impossible months ago. Document everything. Create better inventory systems. I can help with that. Marcus had returned a day early for his appointment. I may not be able to work construction anymore, but I know a thing or two about organizing inventory. They all stared at him. He shrugged. Look, I know I'm supposed to be just a client, but I've been feeling useless since coming home. If you're really trying to make these things affordable for people like me, I want to help. Robert glanced at Rebecca, who nodded slightly. We can't pay much, he warned. I don't need much, Marcus replied. Just a chance to be part of something that matters. That night, after Marcus had helped them reorganize the entire storage system with military precision, Robert sat looking over their revised budget. The numbers were still tight, but something else was growing, a sense of community, of shared purpose. Olivia brought him his nightly tea, peering over his shoulder at the spreadsheet. We're going to need a bigger workshop soon, she observed. One step at a time, he replied automatically. Dad, she sat beside him. Look around. Every step we've taken has led to something bigger than we imagined. Maybe it's time to think bigger from the start. From her desk, Rebecca called out. The Veterans Hospital is on the phone again. They want to know if we can handle trauma cases. Robert looked at his daughter's eager face, at Rebecca's confident smile, at the workshop that already felt too small for their dreams. Tell them yes, he said. We'll figure it out. The local news crew arrived just before 9, turning their modest workshop into a maze of cables and lights. Rebecca stood before a mirror, using her prosthetic hands to straighten her collar, a deliberate choice. She'd told Robert, people need to see what's possible. Are you sure about this? Robert asked. Watching the reporter set up, the story had started small, a feature in the Veterans Hospital newsletter about Marcus's success. Then a local medical blog picked it up, focusing on their affordable pricing model. Now, Channel 7 wanted to do a human interest piece about the nurse and the maintenance man revolutionizing prosthetic care. Too late to back out now? Olivia said cheerfully, making sure their latest prototypes were properly displayed. She'd insisted on wearing her MIT Engineering Summer Program t-shirt, proud evidence of how far they'd come. The reporter, Julia Chen, approached with her notebook. I understand you started this in a community center workshop. She asked Robert, what inspired you to take such a leap from maintenance work to medical devices? Robert glanced at Rebecca, who nodded encouragingly. Sometimes, he said slowly, fixing things isn't enough. Sometimes you need to rebuild them entirely. The interview flowed more easily than he'd expected. They demonstrated their design process, showed clips of Marcus working with inventory, using his new prosthetic hand. Rebecca explained their commitment to affordable pricing, while Olivia showcased their innovative sensor technology. And you developed this while still in high school? Julia asked Olivia, genuine surprise in her voice. Dad taught me that engineering isn't just about formulas. It's about solving real problems for real people. The camera panned across their client wall, where photos showed their growing success stories, Marcus organizing inventory, a pianist testing a specially calibrated hand, a young mother holding her baby for the first time since a car accident. This is more than just a business, Rebecca explained, demonstrating complex medical procedures with her prosthetic hands. It's about giving people back their independence, their dignity, their sense of purpose, and their savings accounts, Marcus added from his workstation. My previous prosthetic cost $45,000. Helping Hands got me back to work for less than a quarter of that. The story aired that evening. Robert watched it with Olivia and Rebecca in his living room, cringing slightly at seeing himself on screen, but proud of how they came across, not as miracle workers, but as problem solvers making a real difference. His phone buzzed halfway through the broadcast, then again and again. Dad, Olivia was checking their business email on her laptop. We just got 15 new inquiries. No, 20. They're still coming in. Rebecca's phone was ringing too. The Veterans Hospital, they want to discuss a formal partnership agreement, and there's another call coming in from the University Medical Center. Robert felt a familiar tightness in his chest, the weight of growing responsibility, of others depending on them. But before he could voice his concerns, there was a knock at the door. It was Mrs. Abernathy from the community center, leaning on her cane and holding a newspaper clipping about their upcoming TV feature. I always knew you were fixing more than just buildings, she said, smiling at Robert. My grandson in Seattle, he lost his hand in an industrial accident last year. Would you be able to help him too? The question hung in the air, heavy with implication. Seattle was hundreds of miles away. They'd never attempted to help someone remotely. We'd need to modify our fitting process, Rebecca mused. Already problem-solving. Set up video consultations. Work with local physical therapists. Create standardized measurement protocols. Maybe develop a preliminary testing kit we could send, Olivia added. Typing notes. Robert looked at Mrs. Abernathy's hopeful face, remembering all the times she'd brought him tea during late maintenance shifts, how she'd always treated him as more than just the handyman. We'll figure it out, he promised, later that night. After Mrs. Abernathy had left with preliminary paperwork and Olivia had finally stopped checking the ever-growing email inbox, Rebecca and Robert sat in the quiet living room. Everything's going to change now, he said softly. Rebecca flexed her prosthetic fingers thoughtfully. It already has. The question is, are we ready for what comes next? More clients means more resources, needed more space, more materials, more lives we can change. She counted. Robert, do you remember what you told me when you first showed me the prototype about not accepting the hand we're dealt? He nodded, remembering that nervous moment in his workshop. Well, look at the hand we've built instead. She held up her prosthetic, now so much a part of her that it seemed natural. Maybe it's time to help others do the same on a bigger scale. Robert's phone buzzed again, another email notification. Another person somewhere hoping they could help. Another opportunity to make a difference. One step at a time, Rebecca asked, smiling at his familiar phrase. One step at a time, He agreed. But maybe we can take bigger steps now. 5 years later, Robert stood in the pediatric ward of Westside Hospital not as a visitor, but as a guest of honor. The ceremony to dedicate the new Helping Hands Pediatric Prosthetic Center was about to begin. Through the large windows, he could see their new main facility across the street, a far cry from that first small workshop. The company now employed over 50 people, including a research team led by Olivia, who had graduated early from MIT with honors. Rebecca appeared at his side, elegant in her formal attire, her advanced prosthetic hands so lifelike in movement that new patients often did a double take when told she used them too. As chief medical officer, she'd revolutionized their fitting protocols, developing a trauma-informed approach that addressed not just physical adaptation, but emotional recovery. "Nervous about your speech?" she asked, adjusting his tie with a dexterity that still amazed him. "Terrified," he admitted. "I'm better with tools than words. Just tell them what you told me that first day, about seeing people, not limitations." The hospital's chief of surgery approached, accompanied by two familiar faces, the twins Rebecca had saved from the fire. Now in their first year of medical school, "We heard Helping Hands was here today," one of them said, stepping forward. "We wanted to thank you, all of you, what you've built. It's inspiring our research into burn treatment and rehabilitation." Rebecca stood professional but touched. "Sometimes good things grow from difficult moments," she said, her prosthetic hand finding Robert's instinctively. Marcus joined them, now their production director, overseeing 5 manufacturing centers across the country. "The new pediatric model is ready for demonstration," he reported, "fully adjustable to grow with the child, just like we planned." A small commotion at the entrance caught their attention. 10-year-old Mia, their youngest client, was showing off her new prosthetic arm to a crowd of admiring doctors, unlike the adult versions. Mia's was deliberately colorful, sparkly purple with silver accents, designed to be shown off rather than hidden. She insisted on the glitter. Olivia laughed, joining their group. "Said if she was going to have a robot arm, it should look awesome." "Smart kid," Robert smiled, watching Mia demonstrate her wrist rotation with theatrical flair. The hospital director tapped his glass for attention, and the crowd quieted. "Today we celebrate more than just a new facility," he began. "We celebrate what happens when innovation meets compassion, when technical expertise meets human understanding." As the director continued his speech, Robert felt Rebecca squeeze his hand. He looked down at their intertwined fingers, one flesh and bone. One advanced prosthetic, a perfect metaphor for their partnership, their marriage, their life together. "Did you ever imagine," she whispered, "that first day in your workshop, that we'd end up here?" Robert shook his head. "I was just trying to help one person write their name again. And now," he gazed around the room at Olivia, "already discussing biomechanical innovations with the medical students at Marcus, demonstrating the child-sized prosthetics to curious doctors, at Mia, proudly showing another child how her new hand worked. Now," he said softly, "we're helping people write their own stories." The plaque was unveiled to applause. "Helping Hands Pediatric Prosthetic Center, where innovation meets compassion." Below it, a photo showed their journey from that first community center workshop to their current multi-state operation. "This center will ensure that no child is denied prosthetic care due to financial constraints," the director announced. "Thanks to the Mitchell Collins Foundation's matching grant program, we'll be able to provide state-of-the-art prosthetics at minimal or no cost to families." More applause, more congratulations. Later, as the ceremony wound down, Robert found himself alone for a moment in the corridor. Looking at the before and after photos of their clients, dozens of lives changed. Hundreds more to come. Olivia found him there, her MIT ring catching the light as she put her arm through his. "You know what Mom would say if she could see all this?" Robert smiled, picturing Catherine's proud face. "She'd say I should have started innovating years ago, instead of just fixing things." "No." Olivia leaned her head against his shoulder. "She'd say you were always building something greater than you knew." one broken piece at a time. Rebecca joined them, her prosthetic hands holding the building plans for their next project, a training center for prosthetists in developing countries. Ready for the next step, she asked, the gold of her wedding band gleaming against her prosthetic finger. Robert looked at his family by blood and by choice, and at the legacy they'd created together. One step at a time, he said. But this time the phrase wasn't about caution or fear. It was about the journey that had brought them here, and the countless journeys still to come, each one beginning with a single act of compassion, each one building toward something greater than any of them had imagined. Together, they walked toward the future they'd built, hand in hand in hand.